All right, in continuing assignment 3, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Photoshop because I have a horizontal landscape. I want to give myself some room. I have history up here, very helpful. I have layers here. I have the navigator here. This is my preferred setup. And these were the 3 files I prepared for assignment 3. I have a Photoshop file of my creature merged all into one layer, but cut out, right? So it's like the perfect sticker. We'll learn later how we can actually turn that in with like white edges around it, make it into a sticker. And then I have different placements I was playing with, putting that creature into my assignment 1 landscape with all the assignment 1 layers, right? So you have different elements, foreground, middle ground, and background. And if you're choosing different placements, think, well, I'm going to try one with my character in the foreground. I'm going to try one with my character in the background. Maybe I try one with my character in the middle ground. You know, what kind of works? So here we have the character in the middle ground. And a lot of the work is done just by the relative perspective of these foreground elements overlapping him. Right? But in order for him to show up in the background, he has to be huge. So it's, the Godzilla version of the creature. And then in this one, he's more the size I kind of was thinking of, like piglet sized. This is actually a very creepy kind of piglet. Imagine if Winnie the Pooh all looked photorealistic. That'd be very odd. Just have to give him a little balloon. But here he is in the foreground. But notice the difference between these two is here I have my entire landscape that I designed, and here I actually cropped it down, because whatever placement you decide, I want your creature to take up at least around 25% of the composition. Right? This is really about 20%, but it's commanding a lot of attention. So you need your character to be a focal point. I'm going to work mostly on this one because this one has a lot more work that needs to be done on it to blend this creature into this environment. Because this one is pushed into the middle ground, it's already pushed behind my texture overlays, which help the color. It's pushed behind the driftwood, which makes it so I don't need to worry about the feet. I mean, this could be interesting where he's kind of stepping over, but that doesn't seem believable. And he's pushed behind this, so it kind of hides the other foot. And then he's pushed behind the rain, so he even gets the weather effects kind of hitting across him. And he's behind the house, and he's behind this tree, and he can be behind these ruins. So I have to decide what's the right placement. And I think the tree actually could work for this placement. I'm not quite sure yet, but this doesn't need as much work. So I'm going to talk about some basic principles of how you make something blend in, and then we will work with that. All right, so let's start with this one. My creature here is on the very top, above every other layer. And if I were to double click my creature and give it a stroke, this is using what are called layer styles, and I make that stroke white, you don't need to do this. And then I put it on the outside and position it. I really can turn my creature into a sticker. So this is very much like just putting a sticker on a background. But what do I want to do with this creature? I want to blend it into this environment. So the first thing I might do is turn on my texture overlays, right? Which are a combination of different clouds, soft edge, kind of cloud forms, overall texture fills that I've erased from, and it can really be built up or pushed back. But by having them all in one group, I can then simply move my creature underneath those texture overlays, and look how that affects the coloring. Even in the foreground, it's subtle, but it kind of shows that mist. It gets rid of the harsh contrast that's on the creature on its own. Okay, now I can't push my creature any lower because my foreground element is that driftwood. So instead, I have to create more elements to overlap with my creature. And so I'm going to do that by looking at the feet. And this is always the first thing you'll look at. Where is your creature actually physically interacting with the environment? And if they're standing somewhere, you want to look at what the feet are doing, what's happening to the ground, so on and so forth. So there's this driftwood here. What I need to do is make a copy on the driftwood layer of this kind of chunk of earth and wood that is overlapping my creature. So I go ahead and hit Command J once I've lassoed that, and then I'm going to move it above my creature. Right, so it's just this little extra layer I built in so that I can then use my eraser at 100% opacity at about 74% hardness, and I can just reveal a little bit of that foot as it works up and goes behind that driftwood. So I just created a little new element, right? No problem, using my old elements to do it. So that helps. The other thing, notice the shadow created in this little well in between these big logs. That doesn't feel like it fits with my creature's lighting, right? So there's a few things I can do. I can take my creature, and I'm going to do it with a duplicate just so you can see the difference easily. But I'll still use the one that I've marked. And I'm going to, just like I've done before with individual components, to make them match, I'm going to play first with the color balance. And I'm going to try to take out some of this yellow that's in my creature, right? Without going too far. But I need the temperature of the lighting to feel like it matches the environment. So a little bit more magenta, a lot more blue and cyan in the midtones. In the highlights, let's see. Generally, you just have to play with it. Always start with midtones. You just have to play and see which direction helps. And it's going to get more and more subtle. Then I go to highlights and I go to shadows. And honestly, I want these shadows not to be warmer or cooler. I want these shadows to be less contrasted. So that's going to be levels, and that's the next thing I'll do. Okay, now the reason I made a duplicate is so I can see if that was helpful. Just that little color balance shift. Yes, it was helpful. Okay, now I'm going to go right to levels, image adjustment levels, and I am going to limit my darks a tiny bit. I'm going to darken my midtones and limit my highlights. And that makes a big difference. And just barely limit my darks, so those shadows don't look so much darker than the other shadows. Now, does that make a difference? That's levels and color balance. So those are the good places to start. Okay, now I can do kind of some spot treatments. And I'm going to show you a way now where without having to combine any layers together, we are going to be able to dodge and burn everything all at once. Okay, so this is how we do it. I'm going to do it under the texture overlay layer, but on top of everything else, including my little driftwood piece right there. And so I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to mark it with blue. Why not? Actually, no, let's mark it with gray. And I'm going to label it all capitals overlay layer. So this is kind of like the special dodge and burn, or not dodge and burn, clone stamp layer we used on the last project. So this is a gray marked overlay layer. And we are then going to say edit fill with 50% gray at 100% opacity, normal mode. Okay? So it will show me my texture overlays over the top of it. But this layer is just solid gray. Now, what do I do with that? I'm going to dodge and burn on this layer. And if I dodge and burn from 50% gray, here's my dodge tool doing the midtones less than 30%. Let's say I dodge here. This will all make sense soon. The more I do it, the more it overlaps. Right? I can create my own textures. And then let's say I burn. Same sort of thing. I have a lower exposure because this tool can move really fast if you're not careful. But it's 0% hardness. I'm going to use my stylus, and let's say I burn right here. You see, from 50% gray, it dodges and burns just beautifully, and you can really control it. Okay, so that looks terrible. Why did we just do that? We covered up all our work with this. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to change it from normal mode to overlay mode. And if we do it in overlay mode, that means anything we dodge and burn, I'll go back and fill it and undo the dodging and burning I did blind. So just fill the whole thing with 50% gray. So now it looks like this, right? Solid 50% gray, overlay layer. Change it to overlay mode, and it's like nothing happened. Because overlay will not show you 50% gray. It will only show you things that are lighter or darker than it. So this becomes a way on this overlay layer to burn a shadow, burn the midtones, make a little soft edge shadow underneath your creature. Burn down his tail a little bit so it feels like it's in shadow, right? Without actually ever editing your creature. Instead, you're just doing an overall kind of non-invasive treatment on this separate overlay layer. And in that same way, I can brighten things in the background. All right, so let me help you set that up. If you want to target something in particular, you can zoom in, and then you can even go a little bit further. And try to get the shadows. Like if I really want that to be darker. Underneath, I can switch from midtones to shadows. All right, let me save it there. Now let's try dodge. And I'll be done with this demo really quickly, and then I'll come around and help you guys set it up. So to dodge, I can do it on that same overlay layer. But right now I've just burned. And I can say, oh, let's brighten the midtones a little bit just on this part of my creature. So it doesn't look quite so dark. And so that those highlights aren't so extreme. And then let's brighten some of the background around him so it comes out a little bit more clearly. Remember, this is before we're having texture overlays turned on. Let's brighten up a little bit of this house in the background. I don't want it to be as stormy as it was before. And so you do mixes. Now, if I turn the overlay layer to normal, this is what it looks like. These are my shadows. These are my highlights. And that's what it looks like with the texture overlay. Now, because it's on its own layer as well, I can play with the opacity of it because we tend to overdo when we dodge and burn. And I can say, yeah, I like what I did. It's really helping my character kind of sit down in the space. But I only want it at about 77%. I don't need it at fully 100. and you can decide. Now, what it won't do